Hey Techno Studs, in this video we're going to get into a wireless review. We're going to take a look at the highlights around wireless and talk about some of those high-level concepts. Throughout this video, if you find that you want to know more information of what we've covered, then go ahead and go back to my Network Fundamentals course and review the videos that I covered on wireless in there. Otherwise, we're going to just hit a really high level around wireless, so that way we go into talking about these wireless controllers and have that basic understanding of how wireless works. We'll start out this video by talking about some wireless standards that are out there. We're just going to briefly mention those wireless standards, and then we're going to get into a more in-depth look into a 2.4 gigahertz frequency and the 5 gigahertz frequency. We'll talk about channels. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons of each of those frequencies, how it sends information across those frequencies. So we'll just hit, once again, the highlights between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequency. Then we'll get into some terminology, things like what is SSID, what is CSMA/CA, what is security, and some of the security terminology as well. Then we'll wrap this up just talking about some of the equipment that you would see that would help facilitate a wireless LAN. When it comes to the OSI model, we have different layers. The first layer is the physical layer. The second layer is our data link layer. The third layer is the network layer. And I'm not going to worry about the other layers that we have, the 7 different layers. But for the most part, when we're talking about wireless, we live here in this layer 1 and 2. Wireless lives in that layer 1 and 2. So the layer 2 is split up into 2 different sub-layers here. And one of the reasons why it is because protocols such as Ethernet and wireless operate within those 2 layers, but not all of layer 2. So that's what the reasoning is for that. So the LLC sublayer is defined by IEEE 802.2. We see that Ethernet is defined by this 802.3, and we see wireless networks that are defined by IEEE 802, and specifically things that define a wireless LAN are defined by this 802.11, and there's a lot of different ones, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then we get into this AC. That's not A and C, that is AC so there's a lot, and the list keeps growing. They keep continuing to add to this. So these are the protocols that define this wireless LAN. I won't get in depth into the physics behind electromagnetic fields and how they operate. That's pretty in-depth stuff. I do cover real briefly about some of that in my Network Fundamentals course, but for the purpose of this, we're going to jump straight into frequency. So frequency starts out really low. We have these extremely low, very low frequencies, and here we have 50 hertz right here. That means that is cycling. That frequency is cycling 50 times per second. This one right here, 1 million times per second, 500 million times per second, 1 billion times per second. So we've got these different frequencies within here. Now what they've done is they've said, okay, we're going to allot certain frequencies for certain purposes, because these frequencies will interfere with each other. And what they don't want is there's some communication out there they don't want disrupted. So things like major satellites and some government communication that's happening, and they want to specify these channels right here can only be used for these purposes. So they've defined what different frequencies can be used for these different purposes. So you've got radio transmissions, and within some of these there are license bands where if you want to start a radio tower and want to start a radio program, start a radio channel, you can't just go out there and just start broadcasting at at really strong levels to put your channel out there. You actually have to go and license that channel, and you are licensed for a certain strength of signal that goes out, so that will only go a certain distance out. So what the key is when we see 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz frequencies, the reason why we see that a lot is because those frequencies are the unlicensed band. It's what they have opened up and said, well, anybody can create equipment in these bands. And so when wireless phones came out, the wireless phones use those bands in there. Microwaves will use the 2.4 gigahertz frequencies, and one thing that's been added to that is these wireless access points or wireless LANs use that 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequencies. There are other unlicensed bands, but some of them are too low, so the frequency is too low, and that low frequency doesn't allow us to have a lot of data go across it. And then if you get too high with those frequencies, then it doesn't penetrate walls very well. We'll talk a little bit more about that in here in a second. But essentially, that is the reason why wireless LANs use 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequencies, is because it is an unlicensed band, and it also allows the amount of data and facilitates being able to penetrate walls and that type of stuff. But for that reason, because they're unlicensed, sometimes there's things that step on each other's toes. If you start up your microwave that has, or used to more so, but it would send out these 2.4 gigahertz frequencies that would interrupt wireless communication. So if you were talking on one of those old cordless phones and somebody started up a microwave, it caused some problems. So that is the frequencies, and that's why we use 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So somehow we have to convey information across these electromagnetic fields. And so we have a couple ways we can do that. One is we can adjust the amplitude. And this is an example of adjusting the amplitude of that frequency. So if you notice that the frequency doesn't change, so the frequency, the cycles per second stay the same this whole time. And what does change is the amplitude or the volume of these waves that are being sent out. So that's one way that we can convey information. The other way is we can change the actual frequency. And this is where you see that the frequency actually goes up right through here. We have a higher frequency through here, and then it goes back to a lower frequency. And so what this will do is this has like what we call channels actually, that it operates within, and it will vary that frequency within there to send that data across there and to transmit these ones and zeros. This is essentially what we're trying to do with it, right? It's to transmit the ones and zeros, the bits that go between the computers. So as I mentioned, since we do frequency modulation is where a lot of our communication happens. If you've listened to an AM radio station versus an FM radio station, there are some limitations that AM has that FM doesn't, that FM compensates for. So when we get transferred data, a lot of times we like to do that through FM signals or frequency modulation. So what does that look like? Well, here we've got that 2.4 gigahertz frequency range, and it's not just exactly 2.4, it's a whole range that we have here within that 2.4 that we have to work with. But we have to carve out a whole channel, what we call a channel, in order to be able to communicate, because we're varying the frequency to send those little ones and zeros. So that's what you see right here is a 2.412 is devoted to that first channel right there, but that channel has a range to it. So the 2.4 gigahertz frequency, depending on what country you're in, will have 1 to maybe 11, possibly up to 14 different frequencies that it can communicate across there. But the problem with these is these channels actually overlap. So you can see that 2 overlaps with 1 and 3 overlaps with 1. And so now we cause problems here where we don't find this overlap. We don't find channels that don't overlap until we get to this 1, 6, and 11, or 2, 7, and 12, or 3, 8, and 13. So, and many countries don't have these last ones on here. So 1, 6, and 11 are typically the frequencies that we will work with when it comes to wireless LANs, and we only have 3. Now, this is not a problem if you don't have a lot of wireless networks all in one little area. But what will happen is they will start stepping on each other's toes if they have to use the same channels. So here's an example of a headquarters office that maybe I want to set up a wireless LAN on. And so what the problem is we are going to set this up. We're going to set up an AP. Maybe the AP is right about this location, and this is the broadcast area that gets sent out from that one location. And maybe I set up another one right here, and this is the broadcast that's sent out from that area. It's going to have a certain distance that it's going to go out, and that's going to be dependent on what the distance that it goes out is going to depend on the power that we have each one of those set to. So the problem with that is if I have channel 1 assigned here, and I have channel 2 assigned here, this axis, or excuse me, this would not be 2, let's say 6, and this one right here would be 11. Now I have this one right here that I can't assign to 1 because it overlaps 1, or 6 because it overlaps 6, or 11 because it overlaps that. So it overlaps all of these. So I got to choose something. Well, in this case right here, it only overlaps this 6 just a little bit. So maybe I can get away with doing a 6 right there. And then this one right here, I can go back to 1 right there. You can see that if I were to get any more into here, it would cause some serious problems with this network. And so we have to really plan this out. And that's more of an issue with the 2.4 gigahertz. And the 5 gigahertz range opens up and we have much more channels. So it gives us a few more options with that. There are other advantages as well. So the 2.4 gigahertz range has too many overlapping channels. The 5 gigahertz range opens that up, so we have a lot more options. But there are some other differences between these as well. So 2.4 gigahertz range is a longer wavelength. Those longer wavelengths that are associated with lower frequencies, the longer wavelengths will penetrate objects better. So what I mean by that is it will go through walls better. It will go longer distances. The signal won't deteriorate as much. And so when you're dealing with 2.4 gigahertz, it's nice if you have any kind of distance, or if you're penetrating a lot of walls and there's a lot of objects and stuff, then it will, it's to advantage to use the 2.4. So there's a larger coverage area, less susceptible to obstructions, and one of the problems though is it's a crowded space. There's a lot of things that will use this 2.4 gigahertz frequency. So we prefer to use a 5 gigahertz frequency. It has higher data rates for it. We can send more data across the 5 gigahertz signal than we can a 2.4. And it is, this says less, but it's actually more susceptible to interference. So that's one of the disadvantages. It doesn't go as far. There's things that will obstruct the signal. So really an ideal would be a combination of both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequency, which is why we still have a lot of this. And 2.4 gigahertz frequency, some of the older equipment doesn't even have a 2.4 gigahertz frequency radio inside of it, or a few things that are the IoT items that you have out there don't have a 5 gigahertz, so they only have a 2.4. So a lot of times you still have to support this 2.4 gigahertz on your networks, even though 5 gigahertz is really the ideal on them. We have this thing we call SID, or Service Set Identifier, an SSID. What a service set identifier is that is the wireless LAN that you're defining with this. So this possibly is getting broadcasted out. It will broadcast an SSID, so that way these computers know what they're actually trying to connect to. And so SSID is Service Set Identifier. That is the name of the wireless LAN that you're connecting to. CSMA is Carrier Sense Multiple Access. The multiple access because you have a lot of devices that are connecting onto this wireless LAN. The carrier sense is because before they connect, they're going to sense to see if somebody else is speaking, somebody else is talking. So carrier sense multiple access is a mechanism designed for multiple devices to be able to communicate on a network that's shared. The key point to this is it's shared, meaning that if this laptop communicates and this laptop is communicating at the same time, that is going to be a problem. These frequencies, if they're communicating at the same time, those frequencies cancel each other out or interfere with each other, and then the signal gets disrupted, and then you don't have communication happening. This wireless access point here just is hearing just some problematic or some garbled messages. And so what this computer will do before it tries to communicate is it will listen. So the carrier sense is just listen. Am I hearing anything? Can I communicate at this time? Before it even tries to communicate. Then we have this thing called collision avoidance. There is collision detection, which is what our Ethernet uses, and collision avoidance. The collision detection is just computers are going to just try to talk, and they're going to just say what they need to say. And if it causes a problem, then they'll back off, and there's this back off algorithm that happens, and they'll wait for a random period of time, and then they'll try communicating again. The problem with wireless is that it's a little more sensitive. And so this collision avoidance is each of the machines will just say, hey, can I speak? Am I allowed to speak? And they'll just kind of slip it in there. It's a small little just, hey, can I speak? And then they will get permission to speak if they can speak. So one of the problems with this is that as this computer is speaking, and this computer is listening, that carrier sense, it may not actually, this computer may be too far away and it not hear that, which is one of the importance between for this collision avoidance, this asking to speak, is because this computer then can just ask, hey, am I allowed to speak? Is this a good time to speak? So that way it tries not to step on other toes of any other devices that are speaking at that time. So that's carrier sense, multiple access, collision avoidance. Now, since everybody's speaking all at the same time or can speak, all other devices, or many other devices at least, can hear what is being said. That is the importance of security. So in its nature, wireless communication is out in the open, and anyone can pick up those signals and be able to listen in on a conversation. That is why it's so important to create security on your network. And not just from an authentication standpoint. Are you allowed to be on my network or not? No, you have to actually encrypt the data. And it's really important that you encrypt the data. So we do that through other mechanisms such as WEP, which was cracked as soon as it came out pretty much. WPA is another method that we can encrypt this data. There's WPA2, which is a better method, obviously. It's a more recent method, and now they have WPA3. So obviously they're continually evolving this and making sure that there's a level of security with wireless since it's inherently insecure. Often there's a misconception between what a wireless router is and a wireless access point, and they're used incorrectly at times. So let's cover real briefly what the difference is between a wireless access point and a wireless router. So first of all, what you're probably most familiar with is a wireless router. This is an example of a wireless router. So with this wireless router, it has routing capabilities on it, and it will actually route data. It also has a built-in switch. You can see that there's multiple ports here that show up on the LAN side of this. There's also a WAN side of this. So the WAN and LAN side is because it's got the router functionality. This LAN side is a built-in switch into it. And then it also has the capability of wireless connection, which is why you see these antennas on it. So I can set this up in my home or small office here. I can plug it into my network connection or my internet service provider and be able to get a network onto my device. Now, I also have seen quite a few times when they plug this wireless this WAN connection, the WAN connection into their whatever router or whatever modem that their internet service provider is providing them. Now, often that has a built-in router in it as well. I'd say a large portion of the time that's got a built-in router into it. So now if you do that, you're doing double routing, which causes also some communication delay on your network, and especially the gamers who it's really sensitive and needs really high speeds when they're playing their games, that can be problematic. So this is a wireless router, and this is what you commonly see. It's more of a consumer level grade here, where you don't see these in businesses, maybe as a backup link or really small businesses. This is the type of equipment that you would see on there. But this is not something that you necessarily want supporting your enterprise network. What you really want is an access point. So here's an example of an access point right here. And this access point, first of all, it comes with mounting bracket to mount it to ceilings and that type of stuff. You'll notice that on here I've got only 2 ports, and one's to link it to another device, and the other one is the main connection that you plug it into your network. And so you plug this access point into the network, and then it's for the sole purpose of providing an access point for your devices. Now, what are some of the difference? I actually bought this for a lot cheaper. This was a $25 router that's right here, and this is more than $100 for this access point right here. So this performs more functionality and has more functionality than this access point, but this access point cost more. And one of the reasons for that is because it's purpose built for specifically just providing access to different devices. It has a better antenna, built-in antenna. It can pick up and do better signaling than this device right here. And I can put more devices, get more devices communicating using this right here. Now, wireless is not magic, so I can't connect just hundreds and hundreds of people to this one device right here. But these Ubiquiti devices are awesome, and we will take a look also at a Cisco device through this module as well. But that's the difference between a wireless access point that just provides a wireless LAN for your users that are on your network, and a wireless router, which performs a lot of different functions. But I would say that cheap router probably doesn't provide great functionality for if you had quite a few people on your network. It wouldn't quite meet that standard. What that looks like on your network is a wireless router sits in the middle of all your network, and then a wireless access point just adds to it to create some sort of functionality. Then we have a wireless LAN controller. So wireless LAN controller is used to manage your different wireless devices on your network. So this device right here is a wireless access point. This is a wireless controller. And what will happen is that this controller will tell this wireless access point what kind of wireless networks it's going to be facilitating and the details of how that wireless access point is going to operate. Now, it could just give those instructions. I've seen wireless controllers that just give instructions to this wireless access point, and then the wireless controller steps out of the picture and is no longer used. But also what can happen is all the traffic from this wireless access point could be tunneled back to the controller on a specific VLAN or using specific protocols, and we'll talk about some of those protocols. And then this controller determines what networks those are supposed to be on and then puts it onto the switch onto those networks or out to the rest of the world. So then how it happens with this is you're able to segregate your traffic better. You're able to separate that traffic out, keep it separated, and have more control, more security over your different networks. And so we are going to be talking about this wireless controller through the rest of this, how to set it up, how to configure it, what it looks like, and some of the protocols that will tunnel that traffic between the wireless access point and your wireless controller. All right, there you have it. We covered some of the wireless standards. We got into the difference between 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz frequencies and how 2.4 better facilitates longer distances and goes through objects better, but 5 gigahertz can transfer more data. And really ultimately, 5 gigahertz is what we want to be communicating with, which may mean that we need more access points over a 2.4 gigahertz network. Then we got into some terminology. What is SSID? What is CSMA/CA? And some different security protocols that we can use with that. Then we wrap that up by talking about the difference between a wireless access point and how it just facilitates a wireless LAN versus a wireless router, which can do much more components, much more different functionalities on your network. But those are two different devices and we need to use them appropriately on our different network. And then we wrapped it up by talking about what is a wireless LAN controller, which we'll be getting much more in depth into the rest of this module.